Hello. We shall review the challenge our country face with fiscal prudence. Yes, I am talking about the lack of fiscal virtue and deteriorating governance in Indian polity. In vote bank politics of India, subsidies, loan waivers and freebies are an important factor to garner votes and retain power. Either it's a all India party or a state party, each one of them outwits each other in promising freebies with every passing election, committing large expense to the state. Let's start first understanding fiscal deficit. When the country indulge with higher expense than revenue, to avoid crowding out private savings, but land up with external debt. Let's start with the belief that the intentions of the policy makers have been always good and the objectives are set to achieve manageable debt for India in the future. So, the politicians and the bureaucrats understood the growing populism and social expenses, came together to discuss on how to contain the growing national debt year over year. It was in 2003, they introduced the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act called FRBM Act. To manage budget and contain debt from going out of hand, first, they decided to contain the primary deficit. Primary deficits are new additional debt generated this year, and reducing the same will hold the national debt from growing. Second, they decided to grow the government revenue by both direct and indirect tax. The objective was to simplify the process, increase the base and reduce revenue deficit. Third, they decided to control the fiscal deficit and not add new debt. The objective was to bring down the fiscal deficit, managing the primary deficit and revenue better. But, in 13 years we achieved little. The first target year was 2008, but blame it on 2007 financial crisis, and we are in 2017 and still lacking implementation, causing great concern. The present government felt the heat and in 2016 formed a new committee under Mr. Singh and asked for suggestions on fiscal prudence and way forward. This is the last 10-year trend of fiscal deficit falling from a high of 6.4% in 09 to 10. State deficits are about 2% more and is a great concern that it is growing in percent. Mr. Singh reports suggest that in order to contain the national debt, government has to manage fiscal deficit and gradually by 2023 bring it down to 2.5% of GDP. Government has to simplify and broaden tax base to increase tax revenue and collection efficiency. The FRBM target is to achieve a revenue deficit of 0.80% by 2023. What is important though is to understand that the central government has to focus on the tax revenue percent versus GDP, which is at a low of 16% compared to other similar countries. Primary deficit is a key factor to be managed to control debt. On average, primary deficit as a percent of GDP is 3.2% and is highest with comparable countries. FRBM targets 2% by 2023. Reducing debt brings down interests and the revenue can be employed for productive use. FRBM targets to bring down the debt to 60% of GDP, that's 40% from central and 20% from state. So, to avoid any macroeconomic disasters due to growing debt, it's imperative for India to control fiscal deficit by 2.5%, revenue deficit by 0.8% and debt by 60% of GDP by 2023. So, what's the challenge? Economists once again have given macro targets to be achieved by 2023. India is financially strong but cannot afford a macro crisis due to rising debt. Let's go back to the topic. Fiscal virtue. Though economists set the agenda, it is the politicians who decide the course. History suggests politicians are driven by populism. With FRBM Act in force, this year alone, farm loan waiver of 750,000 million rupees announced. Yes, it is important to support farmers, but who will pay for this? How much more? So much more, for laptops, or ammo canteens, 6 state electricity boards, ballooning pay commissions. Yes, there are some key social necessities, but mostly outright populism. Fiscal virtue cannot be legislated. We need to bring in a sense of responsibility with politicians, and they have to mature and not act opportunistic to win votes and retain power. There is little attention by electorate, media, and even opposition parties on the non-compliance by both central and state governments and the resulting macroeconomic movement. Common man have a large role to play in achieving the macroeconomic targets by keeping the politicians in check. India cannot afford further to be slack and lacking fiscal virtue. So, I hope you enjoyed this video on the importance of fiscal virtue. Common man should focus on macroeconomic challenges and lead and grow India stronger. Thank you.